I didn't recognize him until he saw the bruises I couldn't hide. The tray in my hands felt heavier than it should have. Like every glass I carried knew I didn't belong here. Not in a place where the floors gleamed like mirrors and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and quiet power. I kept my eyes down the way Mrs. Hargrove had taught me on my first day. Don't look at them. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist unless needed. That was the rule for girls like me, especially girls who had something to hide. I adjusted my sleeve again, tugging it just a little lower over my wrist, even though it was already warm under the kitchen lights. But warmth was easier to handle than questions, and questions were dangerous, especially now, especially with the life growing inside me that nobody here was supposed to notice. I moved carefully between tables, counting steps in my head like I always did. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3. Don't drop anything. Don't draw attention. Don't let them see your hands shaking, because if they saw that, they might see everything else, and I couldn't afford that. Not anymore. Not when I was so close to saving enough to leave, to disappear somewhere quiet where no one knew my name, or who I used to be, or who I used to wait for. The music shifted in the ballroom, softer now, like the entire room was holding its breath, and I felt it before I saw it. That subtle change in the air, the kind that makes people straighten their backs and lower their voices without knowing why. Someone important had arrived. I kept walking, eyes down, just like I was trained, but the silence followed him like a shadow stretching across the floor, and when his shoes stopped just a few feet away from me, something in my chest tightened before my mind could catch up. I turned slightly, just enough to step around him, just enough to stay invisible, but my hand slipped, just for a second. The tray tilted, and his hand reached out, steadying it before anything could fall. His touch was firm, controlled, nothing like the hands I'd learned to flinch from. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Careful, he said, his voice low, calm, but there was something under it, something sharp enough to cut through years of silence. I nodded quickly, whispering a thank you, already pulling back, already retreating, but not fast enough, because in that 1 second, my sleeve had shifted, just enough to reveal the edge of something I had worked so hard to hide, and I felt it before I saw it. The way his hand stilled, the way the air changed again, heavier this time, like a storm rolling in without warning. I tried to pull my arm back, but his fingers tightened just slightly, not hurting, just stopping me. And that's when I made the mistake of looking up, of meeting his eyes for the first time, and the world tilted, because I knew those eyes, even after all these years, even after everything. I knew the exact shade of blue that used to look at me like I mattered, like I was something worth protecting. Emily, he said, and my name sounded different in his voice, like it had been waiting there for years, like it had never left. My heart stumbled, then raced, panic flooding in where recognition tried to take hold. You have the wrong person, I said quickly, too quickly, my voice barely steady as I pulled my arm free this time, forcing a small, practiced smile, the kind that meant nothing, the kind that kept people from asking questions. But his gaze didn't move, didn't soften, it sharpened, dropping from my face back to my wrist, to the marks I couldn't explain away, and then lower, to the slight curve I had been hiding beneath layers of fabric and careful posture. And when his eyes lifted again, something in them had changed, something colder, something that made the entire room feel smaller. Who did this to you? He asked, quietly, but it wasn't really a question, and in that moment, I realized something I wasn't ready to face. He didn't just see me, he saw everything, and nothing was going to stay hidden anymore. His question did not echo, it settled, heavy and certain, like something already decided, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room drift toward us without anyone daring to look directly, because even silence around him had rules. I swallowed, forcing my shoulders to stay still, forcing my voice to stay small. It was nothing, I said, the same lie I had been telling for months. The same lie that had kept me safe enough to survive. But his gaze did not move, did not soften. It only grew sharper, more focused, like he was reading every crack I had tried to hide. Nothing does not leave marks like that, he replied, quieter now. And somehow that made it worse, because it meant he was not asking for the room. He was asking for the truth. And the truth was the one thing I could not afford to give him. Not here, not like this. I stepped back. One small step. Then another, putting space between us like distance could undo recognition, like it could rewind time to before he said my name. "Sir, please," I said, keeping my tone professional, distant. "I need to get back to work." But the words felt fragile the moment they left my mouth, because nothing about this felt like work anymore. It felt like standing on the edge of something I had spent years avoiding, something I had buried the night he disappeared without a word. I turned, intending to walk away, to disappear into the kitchen where I could breathe again. But his voice stopped me before I could take more than 2 steps. "Emily," he said again, and this time it was not a question, it was a memory, and that was more dangerous than anything else. My chest tightened, and for a second, I was not in a ballroom surrounded by chandeliers and polished marble. I was standing barefoot on cracked pavement, laughing at something stupid he said when we were both too young to understand how quickly everything could change. I shut that memory down before it could take hold, before it could make me weak, because weakness was how you got hurt, and I had learned that lesson too well. I turned back slowly, keeping my expression blank, controlled. "You are mistaken," I said, each word measured, careful, but his eyes did not believe me. And that was the problem. He had never been someone you could lie to, not really, not successfully. His attention dropped again, not to my wrist this time, but lower, to the way I held myself, to the way my hand hovered unconsciously near my stomach, protective without thinking, and I saw it happen. The exact moment he understood something I had not said. His jaw tightened, just slightly, but enough that I felt it like a shift in the ground beneath me. "How far along?" he asked, and the question stole the air from my lungs, because it was too direct, too personal, too close to everything I had been trying to keep hidden. I shook my head immediately, instinctively. "That is none of your concern," I said, but my voice betrayed me, softer than it should have been, less certain than I needed it to be, and that was all it took. He stepped closer, not invading, not forcing, but closing the distance enough that the rest of the room faded into something distant and irrelevant. "It is my concern," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my pulse spike. Not anger, not exactly, something deeper, something that sounded dangerously like regret. It stopped being just your problem the moment I saw those marks. I wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right, that whatever we had been once did not give him a place in my life now, but the words tangled in my throat, because part of me knew the truth I did not want to face. He had always been the one person who could see through me, and I hated that he still could. "You do not get to ask me anything," I said finally, finding just enough strength to hold his gaze, to push back even a little, and for a second, something flickered in his expression, not anger, not offense, something quieter, heavier, like he was hearing something he deserved. "You are right," he said, and the admission caught me off guard, because I had expected control, not agreement. "I do not get to ask," he continued, his voice steady but lower now, almost restrained, "but I am going to find out anyway." And the certainty in that sentence sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with knowing exactly what kind of man he had become while I was gone. I took a step back again, instinctively protecting the only thing that mattered now, and for the first time since he said my name, I realized something I should have understood immediately. I was not the only one who had changed, and whatever he had turned into, it was not someone who walked away twice. I should have walked away. That was the only smart move left. Disappear into the kitchen, finish my shift, collect my paycheck, and pretend this never happened. Just like I had pretended for years that the boy who once promised to protect me had not vanished without looking back. But my feet did not move, not the way they should have, because something in his voice had already reached past the walls I built, and I hated that. I hated how easily he could still do that. The music in the ballroom resumed, soft and distant, like the world was trying to continue around us. But the space between him and me felt sealed off, separate, untouchable. I forced myself to turn again, this time faster, gripping the tray tighter than necessary as I moved toward the service door, each step deliberate, controlled. Do not run, do not draw attention, do not give him a reason to follow. But I felt it anyway, that quiet shift behind me, the kind that meant he was not letting this end here. I pushed through the door into the hallway, the noise of the party cutting off instantly, replaced by the hum of overhead lights and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. My breath came faster now, uneven, and I pressed my palm briefly against the wall, grounding myself. 1 second, just 1 second to get control. That was all I needed. Emily. His voice came again, closer this time, and I closed my eyes for half a second because of course he followed. Of course he would not let me go, not. Now that he had seen enough to ask questions, I turned slowly, forcing myself to face him in the narrow hallway where there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to disappear. You should not be back here, I said, trying to keep the distance in my voice, trying to rebuild the line I needed him to respect. But he did not stop, not until he was standing a few feet away, close enough that I could see the small details that time had changed, the sharper lines in his face, the way his expression stayed controlled even when his eyes did not. Neither should you, he replied, his gaze sweeping briefly over the plain uniform, the scuffed shoes, the badge with my name printed in cheap ink like it belonged to someone else. And for a second, something flickered across his face that I did not want to name, something that looked too much like guilt. I straightened instinctively, defensive. It is a job, I said, simple, final, because that was the truth I had chosen, the one that kept everything else from unraveling. But he shook his head slightly, not in disagreement, in disbelief, like he was seeing a version of me that did not match the one he remembered. This is not where you were supposed to end up, he said quietly, and the words hit harder than they should have, because they carried the weight of everything that had gone wrong between then and now. I let out a small breath, steadying myself. None of us end up where we were supposed to, I answered, and this time my voice did not shake, because that part was true too, more true than anything else in this moment. His eyes searched mine, like he was trying to find something familiar in the space between who I was and who I had become, but I did not let him. I could not afford to let him, not when I had learned the cost of trusting someone to stay. Who is he? Adrian asked after a moment, his tone changing again, quieter but more focused, and I knew exactly what he meant without him needing to explain. My stomach tightened instinctively, my hand moving just slightly before I stopped it, forcing it back to my side. No one you need to worry about, I said, the lie automatic, practiced. But his expression did not change, did not accept it. He already is, he replied, and there was something in that sentence that made the hallway feel smaller, like the walls had shifted closer without moving. I shook my head, stepping back just enough to re-establish distance. This is not your problem, I said, firmer now, because I needed him to understand that, needed him to stay out of it, to leave things exactly where they were, broken but contained. It is not your life anymore. And for the first time since this started, something real crossed his face, not control, not calculation, something deeper, something that looked like it had been there for a long time, waiting for a moment like this. That is where you are wrong, he said, his voice low but steady, and the certainty in it made my chest tighten again. It has always been my problem, and before I could respond, before I could push back or walk away or say anything at all, a voice from the kitchen called my name, sharp and impatient, breaking the moment just enough to give me an escape. I turned immediately, taking it without hesitation, because distance was the only thing that had ever kept me safe. But as I stepped through the next door, I knew something had already changed, because this time, he knew where to find me, and something in his eyes told me he was not going to stop until he did. I should have focused on the dishes, on the rhythm of work that usually kept my thoughts quiet. Rinse, stack, dry, repeat. But my hands would not steady, not after the way he looked at me, not after hearing my name in his voice again like it had never been buried. Emily, move faster, the head chef snapped, his tone sharp enough to cut through everything else, and I nodded immediately, forcing myself back into motion, because routine was safe and thinking was not. I reached for another plate, my fingers slipping slightly against the smooth surface before I caught it just in time. Do not drop anything, do not draw attention, do not give anyone a reason to look closer. That was the rule, but it felt impossible now, like something had already cracked and I could not piece it back together fast enough. I kept my eyes down, scrubbing harder than necessary, letting the hot water sting my skin just to feel something predictable, something I could control. But even that did not help, because every few seconds, my mind replayed that moment in the hallway. The way he said it has always been my problem, and I hated that it still affected me, hated that after everything, some part of me still wanted to believe him. You look pale. Sarah's voice came from beside me, softer, concerned, and I flinched slightly before I could stop myself. She noticed everything. Always had. I am fine, I said quickly, too quickly, reaching for a towel to avoid her eyes. But she did not move away. Did not accept it the way everyone else did. That guy out there, she said carefully, lowering her voice just enough. The one everyone stood up for. Do you know him? My grip tightened around the towel. Just for a second. Then I forced it to loosen. Casual. Normal. Nothing to see. No. I answered. The lie automatic. But it felt thinner this time. Easier to see through. She watched me for a moment longer, then sighed quietly, like she knew better but chose not to push. Just be careful, she murmured, and I nodded without responding, because careful was the only thing I had left, the only thing keeping everything from falling apart. The shift dragged on longer than usual, each minute stretching, heavy and slow, until finally the last guests began to leave and the kitchen started to quiet, the tension easing just enough for me to breathe again. I changed quickly, pulling on my worn jacket, making sure it covered as much as possible before grabbing my bag. I did not wait for anyone, did not linger. The sooner I left, the sooner I could put distance between myself and this place, between myself and him. I pushed through the back exit into the cool night air, and for a second, I just stood there, breathing in the quiet, the street mostly empty except for a few parked cars and the distant hum of traffic. This was the part one always liked, the moment between work and everything else. The moment where I could pretend I was just another person going home after a long shift, not someone carrying secrets too heavy to ignore. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking, keeping my pace steady, not too fast, not too slow, just normal, always normal, but I only made it halfway down the block before I felt it again. That same shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like something had a line behind me without making a sound. I stopped without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, and when I turned, he was there, leaning against a dark car like he had been waiting, like he knew exactly which door I would walk out of and when. My heart dropped into my stomach, because this was not coincidence. This was intention, and intention was harder to escape. You should not be out here alone, Adrian said, straightening his eye. Turned, his voice calm, controlled, like we were continuing a conversation that never ended. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, to not show the way my pulse had started racing again. I am not alone, I replied, even though the street behind me was empty. Even though we both knew that was not true. His gaze flicked briefly past me, confirming it in a second, then returned to my face, steady and unreadable. You are now, he said quietly, and something in the way he said it made my chest tighten again. Not fear exactly, something more complicated, something that felt dangerously close to being seen. I shook my head, stepping back instinctively, putting distance between us again because that was the only thing I trusted. You should go back inside, I said, keeping my voice firm, trying to end this before it could start again. But he did not move, did not step away. Not without you, he replied, and the certainty in his tone made it clear this was not a suggestion, not a question, it was a decision. And that was the moment I realized the truth I had been trying to ignore since he said my name. Walking away had never really been an option, not once he saw me, not once he decided I mattered again. I should have kept walking. That was the only rule that ever worked. Keep moving. Do not stop. Do not let anyone pull you back into something you already survived. But my feet stayed planted like the ground beneath me had decided for me. And I hated that feeling. Hated how quickly control slipped the second he was near. I am going home, I said, steady, simple, because simple things were easier to defend. But he did not step aside. Did not even look like he was considering it. His attention stayed fixed on me like there was nothing else on this street worth seeing. Then I will take you, he replied, like it was obvious, like it was already decided, and something in me flared at that, sharp and immediate. No, I said, faster this time, stronger, because I needed that line to exist, needed something to push against. I do not need your help. The words hung there between us, thin but necessary, and for a second, the night felt quieter, like even the distant traffic had paused to listen. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, not anger, not offense, something more controlled than that, something that meant he was adjusting, recalculating. You needed it before, he said, and the words hit harder than they should have, because they were too close to something I had buried. I shook my head immediately, stepping back again, putting more space between us even if it felt temporary. That was a long time ago, I answered, my voice tighter now, because I could feel the past trying to push its way in, trying to remind me of things I had worked too hard to forget. People change. And that part was true. I had changed. I had learned how to survive without waiting for someone to come back, without believing promises that disappeared overnight. But he took a step forward, closing the distance I had just created, not aggressively, not forcing, just enough to make it clear that distance was not something he was going to accept anymore. Not everything changes, he said quietly, and the way he said it made my chest tighten again, like he was holding on to something I had already let go of, or tried to. I crossed my arms instinctively, protective, defensive. You do not get to decide what stayed the same, I said, and this time there was no hesitation, because that was the truth I needed him to understand, needed him to respect. But he did not argue, did not push back the way I expected. Instead, his gaze dropped. Briefly, not away, just lower, to the way I held myself, to the way my posture shifted just slightly, protective without thinking, and when his eyes lifted again, there was something else there now, something heavier, something that made my pulse spike again. When was the last time you slept through the night? He asked, and the question caught me off guard so completely that I did not answer right away, because it was not what I expected, not what I was prepared for. That is not your concern, I said finally, defaulting back to the only defense I had left, but my voice was softer now, less controlled, and I hated that. Hated how easily he could find the cracks I tried to hide. It is, he said again, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just certainty, the kind that did not need permission. You are exhausted, you are working too much, and you are trying to carry something you should not be carrying alone. Every word landed too close, too accurate, and I felt my control slipping in small, dangerous ways. I shook my head again, sharper this time. Stop, I said, because if he kept going, he would say something I could not ignore, something that would make this harder than it already was. But he did not stop. Not completely. Whoever put those marks on you, he continued, his voice lower now, more controlled, like he was holding something back on purpose, is not someone you should be going home to. And that was it. That was the line. The one thing I could not let him cross. I stepped back again, faster this time, my heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with what waited at the end of my walk. You do not know anything about my life, I said, the words sharper than before, because they had to be, because I needed them to be enough to keep him out. But he did not look convinced, did not look like someone who would walk away just because I asked. And that was the problem. That was always the problem. Then tell me, he said. And there was something in his voice that made the night feel even quieter, something that sounded dangerously close to an offer instead of a demand. Tell me what happened after I left. And for a second, everything in me went still, because that was not a question I had ever answered out loud, not to anyone, not even to myself. And I realized in that moment that this was not just about the present anymore. It was about everything I had tried to leave behind, and he was standing right in front of it, refusing to let it stay buried. I did not answer him right away because answering meant opening something I had kept sealed for too long. And once it was open, I did not know if I could close it again. The night felt colder now even though nothing had changed. The same streetlights, the same quiet block, the same distance between us, but everything inside me had shifted. You left, I said finally, the words coming out slower than I expected, heavier, like they had been waiting. That is what happened. I kept my eyes on him, forcing myself not to look away, because if I did, I might lose the small amount of control I still had. His expression did not break, but something in his posture stilled, like he had been expecting anything except that. I know, he said quietly, and the simplicity of it almost made me laugh, because of course he knew. That was the one part of the story he had lived through, but he did not know the rest. He did not know what came after, and I was not sure I wanted him to. No, I said, shaking my head slightly. You know that you left, you do not know what that meant. My voice steadied as I spoke, because once the words started, they did not feel as impossible as I thought they would, just real. You do not know what it is like to wait for someone who promised they would not disappear, and then realize they are not coming back. I watched him carefully, waiting for him to interrupt, to defend himself, to say something that would make this easier to shut down. But he did not. He just listened, and somehow that made it harder. You do not know what it is like to figure everything out alone after that. I continued, quieter now, because this part was not anger. It was something else, something closer to truth. To learn how to survive without expecting anyone to show up, my hands tightened slightly around the strap of my bag, grounding myself, keeping my voice from shaking. So do not stand here and act like you understand anything about my life now. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with everything I had not said, everything I was still not saying. And for a moment, I thought that would be enough, that it would push him back, make him step away, but it did not. He took a slow breath, like he was choosing his next words carefully, like he understood that this was not something he could force. You are right, he said, and again, the agreement caught me off guard, because I had expected resistance, not acceptance. I do not know what it was like for you, he continued, his voice steady but lower now. But I know what it was like to come back and realize I was too late. My chest tightened at that, instinctively, because I had not thought about him coming back. Not really, not in a way that mattered. I looked for you, he added, and that made something in me pause, just for a second, just enough to let doubt slip in where certainty had been. I shook my head immediately, pushing it away. You did not look hard enough, I said, because that was the only version of the story I could accept, the only one that made sense of everything that followed. But he did not argue, did not raise his voice, did not try to convince me. He just held my gaze like he was letting me choose what to believe, and that made it worse somehow. Maybe I did not, he said after a moment, and there was no defense in it, no excuse, just truth, and that was not what I needed, not what I was prepared for. I looked away first this time, because holding his gaze felt too much like slipping back into something I had already fought my way out of. It does not matter anymore, I said, quieter now, because that was the part one needed to hold on to. The present, the life I had built, fragile as it was, that part is over. But even as I said it, I knew it was not entirely true, because if it were, I would not be standing here, I would not be listening. I would not feel this pull between who he was and who I needed him to be. Then tell me, what matters now, Adrian said, and his voice did not push, it waited, steady and patient in a way that felt unfamiliar coming from him. And for a moment, I hesitated, because the answer was simple, but saying it out loud made it real in a way I could not take back. My hand moved again. This time I did not stop it, resting lightly against my stomach, protective without thinking, and his eyes followed the movement instantly, understanding settling in before I even spoke. This, I said softly, and that single word carried everything I had not explained, everything I was trying to protect, everything I was willing to endure to keep safe. The silence that followed was different this time, not heavy, not tense, something quieter, more focused, and when I looked back at him, the expression in his eyes had changed again, not just recognition, not just concern, something deeper, something that made my pulse steady and race at the same time. Then that is what matters to me too, he said, and the certainty in his voice was immediate, unshaken, and for the first time since this started, I realized this was no longer just about the past. It was about what he had decided now, and something in me understood, even if I did not want to admit it yet, that he was not going to walk away from this either. I should have said no immediately, should have shut it down the second the words left his mouth, because letting him in even a little meant risking everything I had barely managed to hold together. But the way he said it stayed with me, not loud, not forceful, just certain, like he had already made the decision and was simply waiting for me to catch up. And that unsettled me more than anything else. You do not get to decide that, I said, my voice quieter now, but still holding its edge. Because I needed that line to stay intact, needed to remind both of us that this was not his life to step into, not anymore. But he did not react the way people usually did when I pushed back. He did not step away, did not argue. He just stood there, steady, like he was giving me space to say everything I needed before he answered. And somehow that made it harder to hold on to the distance I was trying to create. I am not deciding for you, he said after a moment, calm, measured. I am deciding. For me, the distinction was subtle, but it landed heavier than anything else he had said so far, because it meant he was not asking permission. He was making a choice, and I could feel that shift settling into place whether I wanted it or not. I shook my head, stepping back again, needing space, needing air. You cannot just show up after years and act like you have a place here, I said, the frustration slipping through now. Because this was not fair. None of this was fair. You do not get to fix things that you broke by leaving. The words hung between us, sharper than anything I had said before, and for a second, I expected him to react, to push back, to defend himself. But he did not. His expression did not harden. His voice did not rise. He just absorbed it like he had been waiting to hear it, like he knew it was coming. I am not trying to fix the past, he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made me pause despite myself. I am trying to make sure your future is not built on something that is hurting you. My chest tightened again, because that was too close, too accurate, and I hated that he could see it so clearly. I crossed my arms tighter, defensive. You do not know that, I said, even though part of me knew he did, at least enough to guess. But I could not give him that, could not let him be right. Not when being right gave him a way in. His gaze held mine, steady, unyielding. I know enough, he replied. And then, softer, and I know you. And that was the problem. That was always the problem. Because no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much I had changed, there were still parts of me he understood too easily, parts one could not hide completely, and I hated that those were the parts he was looking at now. You used to say you could handle anything on your own, he continued, his voice low, almost thoughtful, but you never said you should. Have to. The memory hit me before I could stop it, a younger version of me, stubborn and determined, insisting I did not need help, and him laughing softly, telling me that needing help was not weakness, just being human. I pushed it away immediately, because that girl did not exist anymore. She could not afford to. That does not apply anymore, I said quickly, but my voice lacked the certainty I needed, and he noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes softened just slightly, not in pity, not in sympathy, something steadier than that, something that felt like understanding. It still does, he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just quiet certainty. And for a moment, I did not know how to argue with that, because part of me remembered believing it once, part of me still wanted to, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. I looked away again, breaking the connection before it could pull me further in, focusing on the empty street, the familiar path I walked every night, the life I had built piece by piece without him. I do not need you, I said, softer now, not because I believed it completely, but because I needed to say it, needed to hear it out loud, like it could make it true. But when I looked back at him, his expression had not changed, his resolve had not shifted, and that was when I understood something I had been trying to avoid since this began. He was not here because I needed him. He was here because he had decided I mattered, and that was not something I could control. Maybe not, he said, his voice steady, grounded. But that does not mean I am leaving. And the finality in those words settled into the space between us like something permanent, something that was not going to move no matter how much I tried to push it away. And for the first time, I realized this was no longer about convincing him to walk away. It was about figuring out what to do now that he would not. I should have left right then, ended it before it could become something bigger than I could control. But my feet stayed where they were, like the ground had decided this moment mattered more than anything waiting for me at home. And that scared me more than him not leaving, because I had built my life on moving forward, not standing still. You always do that, I said quietly, more to myself than to him at first, but he heard it anyway. Of course he did. His attention never slipped, not even for a second. Do what? He asked, not defensive, not sharp, just waiting. And I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding, because the words had already formed and holding them back felt harder than letting them go. You decide something and act like everyone else just has to adjust, I said, lifting my eyes to meet his. Again, forcing myself not to look away this time. Like it is already done because you said it is. The silence between us shifted, not heavier, just more focused, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away. And for a moment, I thought he might deny it, might tell me I was wrong. But he did not. He just studied me like he was weighing something, like he was deciding what mattered more, being right or being honest. I used to think that was the only way to keep things from falling apart. He said finally, and there was something different in his voice now, something less controlled, less distant. If I decided fast enough, if I acted before anything could break, then maybe nothing would. I frowned slightly, caught off guard by the admission, because this was not the version of him I remembered, not the one who always seemed so sure of everything. And did it work? I asked before I could stop myself, and for the first time, something almost like a bitter smile touched his expression, brief and gone before it could settle. No, he said simply, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he had said tonight, because it was honest in a way I was not prepared for. I looked away again, not because I wanted to, but because holding his gaze felt like letting him see too much. Then maybe you should stop deciding things for other people, I said, softer now, not as sharp as before, because something in me had shifted slightly, not enough to trust, not enough to let him in, but enough to hesitate, and hesitation was dangerous. He did not respond right away, and that silence stretched just long enough for doubt to creep in, just long enough for me to wonder if I had pushed too far. But when he spoke again, his voice was steady, grounded in a way that felt different from before. I am not deciding your life, he said. I am deciding where I stand in it. And the distinction landed again, clearer this time, harder to ignore, because it meant he was not trying to control me. He was choosing not to walk away, and that was something I did not know how to fight. I shifted my weight slightly, my body instinctively angling away from him, from the conversation, from everything this was becoming. You standing in my life does not make it better, I said, because I needed to believe that, needed to hold on to it. But even as I said it, I was not entirely sure it was true anymore, and that uncertainty made everything more complicated. His eyes did not leave mine, but something in them softened just enough to make my chest tighten again. Maybe not yet, he replied, and there was no arrogance in it, no assumption, just quiet certainty, but it will not make it worse. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, because the situation was too fragile for anything that light. You cannot promise that, I said, and this time I knew I was right, because life did not work like that. People did not get to guarantee outcomes, not after everything I had learned. But he did not argue, did not try to convince me otherwise. No, he agreed. I cannot. And for a second, the honesty of that caught me off guard again, because it left no room for false reassurance, no easy answers, just reality. And then he took a small step closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough to shift the space between us. But I can promise you this, he continued, his voice lower now, more focused. You will not have to handle everything alone anymore. And that was it. That was the line that hit deeper than anything else, because it was not about control, it was not about power. It was about something I had spent years convincing myself I did not need. And hearing it now felt like standing on the edge of something I was not ready to fall into. I shook my head instinctively, stepping back again, because distance was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that kept me grounded. I already do, I said, my voice softer now, not as sharp, because this was not anger anymore. It was something closer to truth. And I am still here. But he did not move, did not let the distance settle the way I needed it to, his presence steady, unshaken. You are, he said, but you should not have to be this strong all the time. And that was the moment something inside me cracked just slightly, not enough to break, not enough to fall apart, but enough to feel it, enough to realize that strength was not the same as being okay. And for the first time since this began, I did not have an answer ready, because the truth was, I did not know how to keep doing this alone anymore. And that realization scared me more than anything he had said so far.